I had to think of a new way to introduce our speaker because you've heard all the other stuff I've said about him more than once. Uh, Professor Bratt attended Calvin College, small school to the west of here. Um, is it east? uh, okay, now it is a different presentation. He received his PhD from Yale. He taught for a brief stint at University of Pittsburgh, and then the lion's share of his teaching career has been at Calvin. But here's the part I wanted to tell you. In 2013, when my wife and I moved to Europe, I had to liquidate my theological library, which was a sad thing to do. But I held on to some books that had special meaning for me. I knew the author or the content was especially meaningful, and one of them happens to be Dutch Calvinism in Modern America, and I think this is based on a dissertation. There's an impressive amount of footnoting in the book. I highly recommend this. This book did a lot to explain to me where I grew up and the people with whom I grew up. And then another book that I decided to hang on to, which Jim has signed for me, it has to do with the Reformed Journal, which I've been associated with for a long, long time in its monthly print edition and now in its daily online edition. These are not his only two books, but they happen to be the only ones I was able to hold on to. Welcome. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, glad to be back. I actually gave a copy of the Dutch Calvinism to our brilliant newish pastor at Eastern Avenue Church, Lindsay Small. She used to be an associate here at an RCA. I'm not sure which one. But I said, yeah, I started research on this 50 years ago now. I started my research on that in 1975. And I really don't feel that old. I can't be that old. But anyway, it's apropos to our topic today because we're going to be talking about European immigration and the major changes that brought to American life and American religion. Yeah, so we're in American religion from the Civil War to World War II. Last week we talked about one of the most important consequences of the Civil War and its impact on religion, namely the emancipation of the enslaved population and their formation of independent churches, and eventually their migration from the rural South to the urban North and West. That latter thing is what we're talking about today too, only a migration of millions of people from rural Europe to the American urban North, especially the North, somewhat the West. So we have a lot of the same dynamics. Country people, peasants, often illiterate or marginally literate, coming to a big booming city. This is the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But this kind of street scene is replicated all over the United States. And it's people who talk funny, who are used to a very small town or rural way of life, who have to make their way in a bewildering new world. So immigration is a high stakes venture. You're kind of betting your life that you're going to make it. And you need a lot of support for that. And churches and synagogues provide a lot, are really crucial providers of that support. We often are told that immigrants came to the United States searching for a new way of life. And they wanted new conditions, they wanted a new environment, but very often they wanted to maintain an old way of life, a new chance for an old way of life. So there's tug of war between a strange environment and old loyalties, between new possibilities and yet traditional values. And this comes out in religion as much as anywhere. So those are some of the themes that we'll be looking at today. So navigating the industrial society, the immigrant tide from Europe, with and very heavily in terms of religion, Catholics and Jews. We'll get to Protestants in this era next week. But here you have the cow pens of Ellis Island. People come off ships. Some of my grandparents or great-grandparents came through here. You're put in these little holding pens and waiting for your turn to meet the immigration authorities. They would check your eye for glaucoma. They would check to see if you had any communicable disease. If you did, you were put in a quarantine for a while. They would sometimes give you a new name because your old one was too hard for them to spell. And then they would pass you on to the welcoming arms of agents and hustlers and perhaps relatives waiting for you to sometimes just to get a streetcar into New York, other times to get on a railroad to take you halfway across the United States. So just think of this experience, the excitement, the anxiety, the dread, the bewilderment, wondering what this new thing had in store for you. So overall, look at immigration to the United States. Left-hand column, the volume over the years, and the right-hand column, the nation or empire of origin. So from in the early Republic up to 1840, there were 750,000 immigrants registered. A lot of people were coming over the border undocumented. Well, you didn't need documents. They're coming over the border in Canada, filtering into New England. But that 750,000 figure represents 4.5% of the population of the United States in 1820. So we need to look not just at the volume of immigration, but the relative impact to the society, just numerically considered, the society that existed at the start of this period. Then we have what long until very recently was the largest impact era in American immigration history from 1840 to 1860. 4.3 million people, which was 14% of the United States population in 1840. It was not only huge, but it was strange because now you really have a lot of Catholics coming over, German and especially Irish. Most of the United States at that time was populated by descendants of Britain. Britain and Ireland have not had a friendly relationship over the years. And so you have illiterate, starving Catholics pouring into Boston, the Puritan capital of America. This did not go well. And it's no accident that at that time we have the first America First movement. It was called the American Party. It was a secret society. People would inquire, tell me something about this party. They would say, I know nothing. So it became known as the Know Nothing Party. And it was a party dedicated to immigrant restriction and anti-Catholicism in particular. Then immigration tails off because, boys and girls, you don't want to immigrate to a country that's involved in a civil war. You will be first on the lines and you'll be cannon fodder. So 1860 to 1880, 4.1 million represents 8% of the American population in 1860. Then we have a jump up again for the rest of the century, get to 11% of the population. And then 1900 to 1920, 14 million, which is 13% of the 1900 population. And once again, that high figure precipitates an anti-immigrant wave. There are all kinds of proposals to restrict immigration. The first anti-immigrant legislation is passed while already in the previous decade era, proscribing Chinese and Japanese immigration. So first, East Asian people are restricted. Then there are calls in this next era for European immigrants to be restricted. And that hope is realized, or that hope or threat is realized in 1924 when the Reed-Johnson Act prohibits, radically reduces the number of immigrants allowed in the United States. So immigration drops by 90%. And it's not restored again until 1965. One of the understated phenomena most consequential phenomenon of the radical 60s was the reopening of the doors of immigration in 1965. And those doors have been, passing through those doors have been people mostly from East Asia and, of course, from Latin America. Okay, in terms of origins, I bet you wouldn't have known if I had asked you this before I put the slide up, that the largest source of immigration to the United States has been Germany, 6.9 million, then Italy, then Britain, and then Ireland with 4.7 million. But when you think of the small size of Ireland and the relatively lower population, this is a huge share of the Irish population that came to the United States. Then 3.8 million from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and about the same from the Russian Empire. This is the source of most of the Jewish immigration that we'll be talking about in a minute. There's a key change in the 1880s. Prior to that, most of the immigrants had come from the northern and western nations of Europe, Scandinavia, Britain, Ireland, Germany, a little bit from the Netherlands, relatively speaking. They're the most important, of course, but they're relative in numbers. So from the north and west of Europe to the south and east of Europe, this is the so-called new immigration. But the newest immigration in our own lifetime is from East Asia and Latin America. So relative, going back to the question of volume, relative to population, the 52 million immigrants living in the United States today, these are both legal and undocumented, represents 15.3% of the current U.S. population. And with that high a number, you get another anti-immigrant reaction, such as we're at the core of American politics today. So those are the numbers. Let's get into the qualitative stuff. First of all, considering Catholics in America. So you notice the huge leap in numbers. From 1865 to 1895, we have a doubling of the number of archbishops. These are the kingpins in the Roman Catholic Church. We have almost a doubling of the number of bishops, the administrators of local and regional dioceses, and more than 4 times multiple of the laity, from 3 million Roman Catholics, our best estimate at the end of the Civil War, to 12.5 million just before the 20th century. And the job of the Roman Catholic Church was to try to keep up with this immigrant tide, to harness and harvest it. And yeah, my pictures here, I originally gave this course in the call program at Calvin. So a lot of the pictures are from Grand Rapids, that foreign city to the east and a little bit north of here. You might occasionally get there, so I hope the references aren't that foreign. On the top, we have St. Mary's Church, originally a German parish. It's right at the crossroads downtown where the 2 interstates connect. And the interior of that church is just a lovely, nice yellowish green, kind of a sweet German feel to it, although the congregation today is largely Latino. What these churches are, and this is true for Protestants and Jews as much as for Catholics, these are multifunctional centers. You go here to worship, but you also go here when you're newly arrived, maybe to try to find a place to live, kind of a functional housing bureau. It's a functional job bureau, and it's something of a mating society. Church I go to, Eastern Avenue, it's right on Eastern Avenue, Grand Rapids, south of Wealthy, and as late as the 1950s, there was this phenomenon after the evening service. The men, age-eligible men, would line up on the sidewalk on one side of the avenue, and the age-eligible women on the other side, and they would just kind of stroll back and forth and call to each other. And Dutch dating, what can I say? So this is a multifunctional center of the community. if you ever go past St. Mary's Church and get off and look around, I really, it's a really sweet church to visit. You'll see a really weird discoloration up the outside wall to about 11 feet. And that was the flood level in 1904, when between ice and logs, the Grand River jammed and you had this flood. The east side of the river was protected by a flood wall. West Siders in Grand Rapids are a particular people. They feel victimized, and they have been. That's why you run the interstate. That's where you run the railroad, and that's why you leave open to flooding. So St. Mary's Church was literally a house of refuge for these people, flooded out of their homes. So I mean, that didn't happen often, happily, but it's just kind of a symbol of what we have here. There's so many ethnicities pouring into America at the time that of Roman Catholic background, that we have an innovation in the parish model in the Roman Catholic Church. This took a lot of work to get through, but instead of going to the church in your physical neighborhood, you were allowed to go to the church of your nationality, of your language. So St. Mary's was German, St. Adalbert was one of the 3 Polish parishes. The cathedral was Irish. St. James on the west side was Irish, so forth and so on. And this was characteristic again across the nation. With this large number of people coming in, the model priest knew how to raise funds and supervise construction. They were called brick and mortar priests because all kinds of buildings were going up. You have not just churches, but after the mandate passed by the American Council of Bishops in 1884, each parish was to provide a parochial school. This is the time when elementary schooling was becoming mandatory. And rather than jeopardizing their children, in their words, jeopardizing their children to the care of a generic Protestant school, which the public school largely was, the mandate was to form a parochial school in every parish. Also hospitals, universities, seminaries. So the upper picture here is of the Holy Square in Grand Rapids, the diocesan headquarters, where we have St. Andrew's Church, we have Catholic Central High School, and right across the street, St. Mary's Hospital, one complex. Yeah, the interior of St. Andrew's. I don't know if you're into choir of men and boys, but they have concerts here at Christmas. It's really a wonderful, wonderful atmosphere. So this is really expensive. Not just raising the institutions, but then running them. Okay, every donor wants to slap typically his name on the building, but who's going to run these things? And the answer until Vatican II in 1965 was women. Nuns would be the school teachers. You've all heard stories about the cruel nun with the ruler on the hand if you were misbehaving. When I was in grad school, I had a bunch of Catholic as well as Jewish friends, and we would swap stories of parochial schooling. I had gone to Christian schools, and I never got my hand slapped by the ruler. My 3rd grade teacher would treat miscreants, boys typically, with a twist of the ear. That was about as it got. But these Catholic kids now grown up to be PhD scholars, they swore that the hand slapping with the ruler was true. So they're the teachers in the schools, they're the nurses in the hospitals, and the really interesting stories come from they're the administrators of both. They're running the hospital, they're running the schools. Only the bishop, he thinks that he is. And there are very interesting stories about these women kind of teaching the boss who is really boss. A lot of them are providing the funding. So founder of the Sisters of Mercy, Catherine McCauley, they ran St. Mary's Hospital, now Trinity Health. And wealthy local laity, like the McNamaras, would donate their homes, one of these Heritage Hill mansions, to be the first home of St. Mary's Hospital. Not just providing the buildings and the institutions, but nurturing ministry within the buildings. There's just a proliferation of lay societies. So Protestant attitudes toward the Roman Catholic Church, at least back then, were that they were a pest house of priests and bishops, these unaccountable, scarily unmarried men were running everything. But there was a lot of lay activism. So, okay, Father, you can run the altar, but we'll run the rest of the stuff. And so we have these altar guilds. I'm going clockwise here from the middle left around to the upper right. Altar guilds, people dedicated to providing the funds and the upkeep and the maintenance for the services. A sodality. Sodalities were lay associations dedicated to charity or promoting devotion, promoting piety. So in Protestant circles, these are called small groups, small group Bible studies, right? Same thing here, only dedicated to, reciting the rosary, special seasons in the church year. The most special season in the church year, of course, is Lent. And the upper left here, we have depiction of the Stations of the Cross. Interestingly, this has become more recently quite appealing to Protestants. So at Calvin, they essentially have during Lent a kind of a Stations of the Cross thing. They may not call it that, but it is what it is. A new church planted up in Grand Haven that had something to do with would offer that as well. And the Roman Catholic parish in Grand Haven had ceased doing this. So all the Catholics are coming over to this Protestant church to do the Stations of the Cross. So the life of the soul, not just brick and mortar, but the life of the soul. Then we have these special devotional societies to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Jesus holding out that pump organ, it's all struck me as kind of weird, but it's very popular. And also the Society of St. Jude, the devotion of St. Jude, the saint of hopeless causes, so you've come down with a cancer diagnosis, there'd be a little altar to St. Jude in the hospital, and you could take up your cause there. And then a Roman Catholic equivalent of the all-male secret society, the Freemasons say, which Roman Catholics and Missouri Synod Lutherans and Christian Reformed people were forbidden to join. But they came up with alternatives instead, the Knights of Columbus. And it's really striking, at least when I was a student, you get off the freeway in New Haven, there's this huge tower up on the hill. That was the Klein Biology Tower. And over on the other side, one just like it. That was the Knights of Columbus. So Yale, a traditionally Protestant institution, had their big tower. The Catholics have their own equivalent over here. So a lot of lay activism to keep, to attend to not just the needs of the body, but the life of the soul. It was not all peace and quiet, however, because there were ethnic tensions in the American church. So the established ethnic groups, going into the 1880s, when the new immigration arises, the established ethnic groups in the Catholic Church were the Irish and the German. The Irish were predominant. The old saying was that the Irish were 1/3 of the laity, 2/3 of the priests, and all of the bishops. And 1/3 of the laity, 2/3 of the bishops, and all of the archbishops. This was an Irish Catholic church nationally, at least in terms of administration. But the Germans were particularly heavy in the Midwest. They had sponsoring monastic orders, St. Raphael, St. Alphonsus, and so forth, with continuing strong support, not just numbers, but money and personnel coming from Europe. If you've ever taken a cruise down the Danube or walked around Austria at all, you'll see the very rich heritage of German Catholicism. Beautiful buildings, great artwork, and really good beer. The beer and the brandies were brewed in monasteries because, as St. Paul says, a little wine is good for the stomach. It's right in Timothy. You can read it. These guys, the Germans, more and more got resentful of Irish power. This is complicated by the rising tide of immigrants after the 1880s, particularly Italian and Polish. And we have talk about the heritage or the impact of tradition, impact of the old country, so-called, on your behavior in the new country. Italian folks were the least likely to affiliate with the Roman Catholic Church, even in America, even though that was their native church. Because in Italy, the church ran everything. They were the bankers, they were the landowners, they had tremendous political power, and the little people felt alienated, felt oppressed. And when they got to America, one new thing they did was not go to church. So lay affiliation on the Italian side, lay affiliation with the local parish was maybe lower than of any other ethnic group in the Roman Catholic Church. With the Poles, it was very different. Poland had ceased to exist as a political nation in the 1790s. The Prussians, the Austrians, and the Russians took increasingly big chunks of Poland, so that by 1795 there was no political Poland left. There, the church, as in Ireland, which is also under control of an oppressive power, foreign power, there the church became a lifeline, the center of identity, the center of pride. Tina and I, for our, let's see, that was our 25th anniversary, went to Poland, visited some old friends that we had developed when we were in Amsterdam. And, we like to wander around and go into churches and check them out. It was like a Thursday afternoon, and we wanted to tour this church. We opened the door. It was packed. This is 1978. I'm sorry, 1998. It was packed with people doing a weekday afternoon mass. This was never a problem in Italy. So the church's role in the old country as a sanctuary or a boss would affect your behavior in America. You come to the new country, but you take a lot of the old country along with you. Oh, I'm sorry. On this picture, these are the 3 Polish parishes in Grand Rapids. On the left, St. Adalbert's, now a basilica, made so by the Polish Pope, John Paul II. These were Poles from the German-occupied section of Poland. Upper right is Sacred Heart near John Ball Park. These are this is the area or the parish that served Poles from the Russian part of Europe, of Poland, the Russian sector of Poland. Lower right is St. Isidore. You can see that, and these are for the Austrian Empire Poles. You can see that at along the I-196 on the east side of Grand Rapids. St. Isidore. St. Adalbert was an authentic Polish-German guy. Isidore, that's a Spanish name. They wanted that to be St. Stanislaus. Good Polish name. And the German bishop of West Michigan said that he would be bleeped before he allowed one of his parishes to be named after a Pole. Only he didn't say Pole. He said an ethnic slur. So these old world loyalties and relationships are evident in these churches. They're all Catholic, they're all Polish, but they're from different sections of Poland, right? In Grand Rapids, I don't know how it was in Holland, but in Grand Rapids, this is true for Dutch Reform people too. The people from Zeeland settled in the Brickyard. That's around Michigan and Fuller. People from Friesland, they're special. They produced my wife. They were on the west side. People in my church, it was called the Groninger Hook. People from northeast Netherlands settled there. So it's not just a generic nation, Poland, Italy, whatever. It's particular regions. It's said that Italian Americans didn't know they were Italian until they got to America. They thought they were from Sicily or Abruzzi or wherever. And we'll see this in spades with Jewish. Okay. Overriding everything besides the ethnic tensions and segmentation is the eternal question for all immigrants, Americanization. Do we assimilate or insulate? The assimilation principle is represented by the Archbishop on the right. That's John Ireland, Bishop of Minneapolis and St. Paul. The resistance is represented by Michael Corrigan, Archbishop of New York, on the left-hand side. This is a political and social and cultural, but also a theological question. This is a real-life question in Roman Catholic circles, at least in Europe, at this time. Our democracy, separation of church and state, pluralism, are these compatible with Catholicism? And there are strong voices in the European Catholic Church that said no. The true Christian Roman Catholic model of politics is a cooperation, a privileging of the Roman Catholic Church and their dominance over the culture and their kind of veto power over politics. Others said, and more American Catholics or Catholics in America said the opposite. These are all compatible with Catholicism. In fact, these are a benefit for Catholicism. Related question. Should Catholics dwell in their own institutions, church, school, hospitals, political party, whatever, or enter into American institutions? And by American at this time, you really meant Protestant dominated. This is particularly a question with in terms of education. The nurture of children. Do we trust that to kindly Unitarian ladies? Or do we have our own sisters educating the children in the way they really should grow up? And there was tension over this. And then there were, how respectable do we have to be? This particularly came a question at this time, we'll see, over the matter of alcohol consumption, prohibition. Prohibition or temperance, or radical temperance, which is not temperate at all, but total elimination of alcohol. This was a Protestant-coded cause because they associated drinking with these lower class new immigrants. And so to prohibit alcohol, the manufacture and consumption of alcohol, would be a way of A, keeping Catholic immigrants in their place, B, teaching them how to be good, respectable middle-class people. There are a lot of Roman Catholics that said, no, I'm not an alcoholic. Uncle Ed is, but I'm not. And you're interfering with my civil and religious freedom. What was Jesus' first miracle, pal? Turning water into wine. Protestants, honest, you can read it in newspapers, magazines, like the Reformed Church in America's magazine at the time. Jesus really turned that into grape juice. I'm not kidding, not kidding. Jesus had the Holy Spirit. He didn't need these other spirits, right? And so prohibition became a real badge of middle-class membership, propriety. proving ourselves good enough to be accepted as Americans. A lot of people said, I don't have to prove myself to be good enough for Americans. America has to prove itself to be good enough for me. And so this is a real tension. And again, it's in all ethnic groups. And you see it right now in among Korean Americans and various sorts of Latino American populations. What we're seeing in the United States today is nothing new. It's just the same drama with different ethnic groups. This got related into theology with one of the great controversies in the Roman Catholic Church in the 19th century, the so-called Americanist controversy. Underlying it, by the way, the picture of the on the right is Pope Leo XIII, who has a reputation because he passed the first social justice encyclical, Rerum Novarum. So he's seen as a progressive in terms of having the church devote its attention to social justice, and that's true. But another thing is he's very traditionalist. We'll get to his role in this in a minute. The underlying question is, do the timeless truths of the church have to adapt to a new time and place? So the Catholic Church in Europe has always been friendly to kings, monarchy, hierarchy, aristocrats, and so forth. In America, we're into democracy and free elections and separation of church and state and so forth. So does the Catholic understanding of a proper society and politics have to change because of America? And on the one hand, you have no. Truth is truth. It is one, it is uniform, and applies to all times and places. So we don't adapt. Others say, well, no, it's the church has always changed. Well, the church has always adjusted to particular circumstances. I mean, it started out with a bunch of Semites in Palestine, and after a while, it was up in north of Germany, where previous generation people were painting themselves blue and dancing around oak trees. Don't tell me that the church doesn't change to adapt to new conditions. Okay, so that's one argument. Another was that should the church emphasize American virtues, which is action, practicality, getting involved, changing things, doing stuff, the active virtues, over the traditional virtues that have been emphasized in the Roman Catholic Church, which were contemplative, devotion, monks and nuns sitting up on a hill praying all day. That had long been elevated, and works of mercy, of course, but that had long been elevated as the best example, the best fulfillment of the church's of Jesus' mandate to love your neighbor. You can best love your neighbor by separating from them and praying for them. No, you can best love your neighbor by getting out and helping them in material ways. So active virtues versus contemplative virtues. These two parties kind of got along enough in America. There was room for everybody. Some orders did this, some orders did that. But this really became a question for the Vatican to consider because of French politics at the time. French politics at this time was going through a major upheaval, and we were having the so-called laization of society. Until recently, education in France had been under the control of the church. The church had real positive privileges. In the 1890s, these were being stripped away. And that was tremendously controversial in France, tremendously controversial or threatening in the Vatican. And so America kind of became a guinea pig or a symbolic actor in this unwittingly. And so the Pope had to come out. He addressed the French situation in an American guise. So Pope Leo XIII issued an encyclical that ruled for tradition, upheld the traditional side, without condemning American themes forthrightly. So he did not condemn activist bishops like Archbishop Ireland and so forth. He did not condemn these practical orders in America, but he said that the contemplative virtues were better and that the church was unchanging, and we should hold fast to the past. And this really puts a damper on U.S. Catholic innovation for about 60 years, 60, 70 years. Vatican II, which we'll consider in our next course, if you can hang around that long, Vatican II really opened the doors and brought out the themes of practicality and involvement that the Americanists had supposedly been advocating in the 1890s. So with this edict in 1895, American Catholics understood that a proper place was to go into their enclave, nurture their children in their own separate institutions, take care of each other, make sure the kids stayed with the church, make sure that the biggest prize in your family was to have your son become a priest or your daughter become a nun. It was a very, turned Catholicism in the United States into a very powerful sector of society with high retention rates and real solidarity. Vatican II will prove to be very controversial because when you open the doors, a lot of the kids want to leave, okay? And the solidarity breaks down into what today is called cafeteria Catholicism, right? You take the parts that you like and leave the rest aside. That's after Vatican II. In this era, coming out of this controversy, it was solidarity Catholicism. We're all on the same page. But no matter how much you want to be an enclave, America cares about you, and America will make demands on you, especially when America goes to war. And so World War I is a jolting experience for big sectors of the American Catholic Church. World War I demands a patriotic response. World War I is hard on German Americans, right? Because America's at war with Germany. It's also hard on Irish Americans because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Rule 1 of politics, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The enemy of England is Germany. Therefore, Germany kind of has my loyalty in this war. And so German and Irish Americans came under more or less suspicion during World War I, and they had to prove their patriotism. They had to prove their patriotism. Are you good enough to stay here? In the wake of World War I, for reasons we'll look into later in this course, there's a tremendous rise of tremendous forces of reaction. One of them is the Reed-Johnson Act, lowest item here on the screen, which creates a drastic reduction in immigration, particularly from Southern and Eastern Europe. The spigot of reinforcements pouring into American cities is turned off. This is one reason why African American immigration from the South continues or takes a big boost upward in this time. But another manifestation is the popularity of the Ku Klux Klan. Ku Klux Klan has a tremendous explosion of expansion in the 1920s, not in the South, but in the North and the West. There were more Klan members in Marion County, Indiana, that's Indianapolis, than there were in Mississippi, Alabama, and Arkansas put together. One of the heartlands of the Klan in the 1920s is Oregon and Washington, which we don't really regard as reactionary states today. This was not only anti-Black, as the first Klan had been in the South. This was anti-foreigner, it was anti-Semitic. It was also remarkably anti-Catholic. And so you see the top screen here is a depiction of the tree of Rome. You see on the one hand, the drunken Irishman peeking out of that knothole, and the other one is a bishop. So bad people and dangerous manipulators. The tree of Rome has to be cut down, and the clansmen are doing it. It kind of looks like clanswomen, you know. Oh, by the way, speaking of women, oh, I forgot to point that out. Look at the Sacred Heart of Jesus. If it weren't for the beard, this would be the Virgin Mary, right? A very feminine Jesus that's tied in at the time with those contemplative virtues, right? Manly men go out and do stuff. Women retreat into their private enclave, but there they nurture the soul. Anyway, back to this. Look at the vultures sitting on top in the branches of the tree of Rome, and the mass solidarity of Klansmen going to bring this tree down. And as I said, prohibition, which came into force right in the wake of World War I, made defiance of prohibition helped made the 1920s roar, huh? This was a Protestant culture war versus Catholic. So look at that advertising poster. It's for an election campaign. States and towns and counties could vote themselves dry or wet. And that was a big issue in American politics in the 1910s. Vote for me, says the bloated, drunken, ward-heeling, Democrat, Irish, Catholic saloon keeper. Vote for me. And then the pious Protestant mother protecting her child. No, vote dry for me. So this became all entailed with gender roles and with religion prohibition. So America tried to push Catholicism down, keep it in place, make it clean its house, reduce its political power. But you know, history has an ironic way of twisting consequences of other intended actions. Turning off that spigot of immigration resulted in Roman Catholics by the end of the 1920s being on a par with everybody else in America for education and income. Turning off the spigot of immigration did indeed make help Roman Catholics become more middle class, or at least respectable working class. One of the great heroes of the 1920s, Knut Rockne, not an Irish name, Scandinavian name, but the football team of Notre Dame. You know, 1920s journalism was full of exaggeration and ballyhoo. And one of the most memorable articles was on the sports page of the New York Times a Sunday morning after Notre Dame had played Army at West Point. On the high bluff above the Hudson yesterday, the four horsemen of the apocalypse rode again. They were not war, famine, pestilence, and hunger. They were, and he named the starting line of the defensive line of the Notre Dame football team. For a bunch of, and insert your own ethnic slurs here, I'm not going to do it, for a bunch of Irish street urchins to come and defeat the cream of the American aristocracy, the emerging officer corps. This is astounding. And so Notre Dame remains in the public image. I mean, when you think of Notre Dame, you think football, right? At Soldier Field, a game against Southern Cal in 1927, there were 127,000 people at Soldier Field in Chicago to watch this game. Notre Dame football gave every American Catholic pride. We've made it. We're a power. The prospect of Catholic power was a real issue in the 1928 presidential campaign, depicted in this cartoon on the left. Al Smith, New York State governor, very Irish, very Catholic, and with a very heavy New York accent, right? Was the Democratic candidate. And he was defeated roundly by Herbert Hoover, who had cause about a month after his inauguration to regret his his victory because the crash on stock market about 6 months later. But this election was not only about prosperity versus working class or whatever, it was also about Protestant versus Catholic. And here again, we have the Pope or some archbishop trying to inflate the Al Smith balloon, but it's leaking all over the place, and it's being punctured again by Klansmen who have the cross and the flag to ratify their true Americanness. But a really that a Roman Catholic would be running for president in itself, just running, showed a major shift in American politics. Al Smith's cause was taken up by a Episcopal patrician from the Hudson River, Franklin Roosevelt, who had been a great buddy of Al Smith. Smith turned on Roosevelt after Roosevelt didn't give Smith enough power in his own administration. And finally, Roman Catholics had a great impact on the options for how we should respond to the Great Depression. Upper right-hand side is Monsignor John Ryan, a social ethicist, professor at Catholic University in DC. He adapted the social justice encyclicals of Pope Leo and later Pope Pius into a proposed package of social laws and economic changes that largely mirrored the New Deal. In fact, he was called the father of the New Deal sometimes. That salaries and wages should be not calibrated to market conditions, but to what a family needed to survive and prosper. The living wage, calibrated to the well-being of the worker and his family. This is really a patriarchal plan, but nonetheless, it was very anti-laissez-faire or let the market run things. The Right Reverend New Dealer, John, as he was called, John Ryan, this is the middle of the road option that Roosevelt didn't necessarily follow, but got paralleled. Then there was option on the radical left, epitomized by Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement. A remarkable story. Her autobiography, The Long Loneliness, is well worth reading. She was kind of a party girl, a radical journalist, involved in the bohemian culture of Greenwich Village. Experienced a conversion, was intensely devoted to Catholicism, to Christianity, and turned that against capitalism. Capitalist order is sick to the core, she said. It's not something that's out of whack to be tweaked and adjusted per Father Ryan. Rather, we have to replace the capitalist order with something very different, a radical alternative. Sorry about my spacing here. I don't know how that got scrambled. But she was radically anti-war. She was very much in support of labor solidarity. And she was famous for organizing these houses of hospitality in major urban areas where the poor, the homeless, the dissolute, whomever could come for a meal, for shelter, and for a chance to turn their life around. She was kind of organizing a radical kind of a convent life, monastic life, where the center of religious life is also a center of welcome and refuge for the poor. So that's the left-wing option. Capitalism is rotten and has to be replaced. The radical right-wing option is represented by the radio priest from Royal Oak, Michigan, Father Charles Coughlin. Coughlin, a Canadian by birth, actually. And he's, I mean, you hear this all the time today. A populist, we are the people, we're the deserving people, we're the heart of America. And these big powers are conspiring against us to oppress us. They have to be taken over and thrown out. In 1932, he was a supporter of Roosevelt. The enemy was the bankers. But as often happens, and as Roosevelt, or as Coughlin started calling him in his extremely popular radio addresses, Franklin D. Rosenfeld, accusing Roosevelt of being Jewish, the bankers, the real problem with the bankers is that they're Jewish. And so as the Depression rolled on and the New Deal didn't seem to solve it entirely or quickly, he came up with a different conspiracy, or identified a different group as part of the conspiracy and turned anti-Semitic. So it's Catholics who are left, right, and center in proposing solutions to the Great Depression. Okay, let's take a pause covered a lot of stuff. Any questions or comments on this? Steve? Here.
When does the John Birch Society begin to emerge?
John Birch came out after World War II. It's more Southern California. The big new money, I think it had a lot of more support among Protestants. So Tim and Beverly LaHaye were members of the John Birch Society. Now the target had become communism, right? And any kind of meddling around in the free market system was communist. Yeah, this is post-World War II, when bankers and Jews had been replaced by communists as the heart of darkness.
One of the groups you haven't mentioned is the Spanish. This, of course, was during the time of the Spanish Civil War. There was a very, very strong anti-clerical movement within Spain.
And Mexico, yeah.
And in Mexico. And I was going to say, to what degree did that affect the Catholic Church in Latin and Central America?
Good question. The hierarchy and a lot of the papers and magazines were pro-Franco, or at least anti-loyalists, right? The established government in Spain was being overthrown. So the left wing of that civil war were the loyalists. I don't know how that came out in the laity. I don't know that many of the laity cared, but yeah, it was. There was a lot of, we'll get into this in a minute, there was a lot of support for the loyalists. In fact, volunteers going over there in the Lincoln Brigade to fight on the left side in the American Jewish community. So this was a flashpoint, Catholic versus Jewish, in working class circles in America. There's a lot of support for Mussolini at the start. I mean, good Catholic boy, Italy, Italian pride. He's going to make the trains run on time and replace chaos with order. And he made enough friendly gestures toward the church to get the hierarchy to go along with him or to tolerate him. Okay. The other major change in American religion was the explosion of, excuse me, a Jewish presence on the American scene. Again, with the old immigration from 1840 to the 1880s, most of the Jews coming into America came from Germany, and they would join form the reform or the more liberal or progressive, if you will, left wing of the American Jewish community. You see the expansion, right? There were about 15,000 Jews in America in 1840. By 1880, 250,000. They were fed by 150,000 immigrants from Germany, 150,000 Jewish immigrants. There are many more times that Catholic and Protestant immigrants. This is a notable Jewish component for the first time. These people typically were dispersed all across the United States because they very often started out as peddlers. You have a horse or a mule pulling a wagon with all kinds of household stuff from one little village or farmstead to another. Here's your Fuller brush man, you know. Here's your kind of an Amway guy, only with a not a pyramid, well, not a multi-level marketing scheme. So picture upper left, here's the Jewish peddler with his goods, and the farm wife and her daughters and sisters and so forth. They're looking at her stuff because these farm women had a hard time getting into town, and the store in town didn't have much stuff, and the stuff they had was overpriced. So the Jewish peddler was a familiar and friendly and welcome presence. And they made some money, so they would then next settle down into towns, and these are among the great innovators of the American department store, Gimbel's, Abraham and Strauss, so forth and so on. And they that was very well organized merchandising, and they had nice profit margin. And then their kids in the third generation would go on to professional school, right? The oldest son, the old Jewish joke, the oldest son has to become a doctor to make money. The next son is a lawyer to defend his brother against malpractice. And the third son becomes a rabbi to ask forgiveness for all their sins, right? And the daughter marries up, okay? And so this is a classic case of upward mobility. Pictures here are on the lower left of Joseph Hausman, founder of a department store in the United States, in America, in Grand Rapids, Hausman. His brother across the way, Julius Hausman, a banker, a real estate entrepreneur who owned half of the Upper Peninsula at one time, exaggerated. America's first Jewish, Grand Rapids' first Jewish mayor, and Michigan's first Jewish member of Congress. So Julius Hausman bailed out Louis Campo, who got wiped out in the Depression of 1837. These are the founders. They're the first building of Temple Emmanuel, the synagogue they founded is pictured upper right. It's right across from the parking lot of the Grand Rapids Public Library downtown. They had not formed a religious community, but they had to form one in 1857 when a Jewish peddler coming through town died. And the city fathers went to these two Jewish brothers and said, you know, one of your people, you know, should we bury him in Oak Hill Cemetery? We won't bury him in the Catholic cemetery, but should we bury him in Fulton Street Cemetery? Oh, no, we'll have our own place. And so in one corner of Oak Hill Cemetery, near Hall and Eastern, the part that's elevated as you're starting to go down the hill toward Madison, you look around there, that's the original Jewish cemetery in Grand Rapids. And from that cemetery was founded the first religious organization. This was said on the progressive side of Judaism, so-called Reform Judaism, which is deeply shaped by the Enlightenment and Romanticism as it came to bear in Germany. We need to radically adapt. I mean, from the roots up, radical, huh? We need to radically adapt tradition to the insights and needs of modern life. We subject tradition and revelation to the critique of science and reason. We're modern people. We're not bound by these texts and weird rituals dictated by people wandering the desert 2,000 years ago. I mean, we have to be modern people. We have industry, we have science and reason. These are gifts from God to update Judaism for modern times. Pardon me. And the leader of this is Isaac Mayer Wise, depicted on the right here, and Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. It's really cool. Walking from my daughter's house up to her work place at University of Cincinnati, you pass by Hebrew Union College, and it's, for American religious historian, that's kind of cool. Okay. Radical adaptation. And it's codified in something called the Pittsburgh Platform, dictated in 1885, just as the immigration is going to change. And it's held, the convention that issues these changes is held at Temple Road of Shalom in Pittsburgh. From my office on the 26th floor of the Cathedral of Learning at Pitt, I could look down the street. I could see the cathedral, Roman Catholic Center, and beyond that, way in the corner, I could see Road of Shalom. It challenged or proposed changes in all sorts of every facet of Jewish life. Worship, less Hebrew, more vernacular. No longer sex-segregated seating, but as in Protestant churches, you seat people by their family. You reduce ritual, and you increase the ethical dimension of the sermons. Kosher diet is optional, nice if you want to do it, but it's not of the essence of Judaism. They also forswore Zionism. Jews, they said, are not a nation, but a religious community. Isaac Mayer Wise says, Washington, D.C. is my Jerusalem. America is my Israel. There's a scary dimension to that, making Washington, D.C. Jerusalem. But anyway, they also forswore messianism and other supernatural elements of Judaism. Look at this Messiah Savior figure. That's an old myth. That's not going to happen. We are instead, God has ordained us to be the voice to the whole world of ethical monotheism. So monotheism, one God, but the import of that is ethical. It's not rituals. It's not doctrines. It's behavior. And there's a good bit in the Jewish tradition to uphold this. They're selecting out one part of the Jewish tradition for a special focus, almost exclusive focus, and letting the rest go. Adaptation to the new conditions. Then the new immigration, the immigration after 1885 tends to come from Eastern Europe. Map in the middle there of the relative density of the Jewish population. You see that the center of world Jewry in 1900 and up to World War II is Eastern Europe, right? Poland, Belarus, present-day Russia. Very high concentrations of, this is the Jewish Pale. So the 250,000 American Jews in 1880. By 1920, there are 4 million. Increase multiple times. 85% of these immigrants come from Eastern Europe. And the most astounding figure to me is that 1/3 of the people from those dark purple places on the map here, 1/3 of Eastern European Jews emigrated because of oppression, the pogroms, lack of economic opportunity, the restrictiveness under which they had to leave. 1/3 of them emigrated, and 90% of that third came to the United States. And they just didn't come to the United States, they came to New York and Newark, East Coast cities. New York City by 1925 contained 10% of U.S. Jewry. 1 in 10 American Jews lived in New York City. It's really different from the earlier pattern, right, where there was dispersion and peddling. The picture in the upper right, upper left, these well-assimilated American Jews welcoming their poor, disheveled brethren from Eastern Europe. Not so much. As happens with most immigrant groups, happened to my wife's family who immigrated to Holland, Michigan in the late 1950s. The established members of your group keep you at a distance, wish you would go away, think that you're a little weird. I mean, there are 8 kids in this family. My goodness. And they all occupy the first belt row in the balcony at 14th Street CRC, and they all come in late. And the sons in that family try to drop candies into the hats of the women sitting down below them. I mean, please clean up your act. Okay. Well, with Jews, this was because of anti-Semitism all around. This became a more pressing need. These German Jews had worked over a couple generations to become acceptable, to become established. They had cleaned up their act. They didn't dress weird, eat weird. They worshiped as families. They were good Americans. And now comes this riffraff from Polish villages, people who eat funny and smell funny because of it. Can you say garlic? Who dress funny, who talk funny, who have no respectability. You're bringing down the side. And so actually, some of the anti-Semitic slurs that have entered American English originated with German Jews. It's my first field was American immigration history, and it's a weird process. A lot of humor, a lot of ironies, and some a considerable amount of pain. For these Eastern European immigrants, Americanization largely meant secularization. So their villages, their shtetls in the Pale, the rabbi had been a person of esteem. All the kids learned Hebrew, all the male kids anyway learned Hebrew, and you went to shul regularly, you observed the holidays. In America, you didn't have to do any of that stuff anymore. You were not restricted in your occupation, in your residency. It was wide open. America is the land of promise. And so these people who came from a pretty strong tradition of orthodoxy often thought they gave up the whole thing. There's a great novel depicting this, The Rise of David Levinsky. The Rise of David Levinsky, Abraham Kahn, the author. Very graphic depiction or poignant depiction of this process. So if you're no longer identified by your membership at a temple, a synagogue, what are you defined by? Well, they moved often into radical politics or into labor unions. So on the right-hand side, we have an assembly around 1900 of labor Zionism. And it was the left wing, these secularizing Jews who became the bastion of support of Zionism, especially after World War I. We're going to return to the land of Israel, even though most Jews had not lived in Israel since the time of the Babylonian captivity. Zionism, interestingly, was opposed by both the left and the right on the American Jewish religious spectrum. Reform Jews had said, America is our Israel. Some of the Orthodox, if you read the novels of Chaim Potok, you recognize this pattern. Some of the Orthodox folks were anti-Zionist too. We can't refound the nation of Israel. That's for Messiah to do. And so if human beings take it around, it's going to be a mess. Yeah. And then there's the favorite version of, the most popular version of Jewish identity, checkbook Judaism, right? You maybe go to shul on the high holy days, or maybe not, but you support the hospitals, the educational institutions, and the welfare, social justice measures taken by people who have remained religious. So you contribute to the United Jewish Appeal that spans all sectors of the community. And on the left hand here, we have the annual meeting of the UJA. For those who remained religiously active, there's denominational differentiation. Conservative Judaism is a new thing in America. It's not Orthodox, but it's not Reform either. It appeals to immigrants, Jewish immigrants of Eastern European background who want to hold on to Judaism as a religious operation, as a religious reality, but don't want to observe all the particular demands of Orthodoxy. And the great pioneer of this option is Solomon Schechter, United Jewish Seminary, Theological Seminary, right next to Union Seminary on the upper west side of New York, of Manhattan. A middle way between Reform and Orthodoxy. We're not going to give up as much as Reform, but we're not going to hold to all the legalistic details of Orthodoxy. Try to find a middle ground. And this prospers as long as the Reform and Orthodox communities are both vibrant. But the difficulty for conservatism is you're defining yourself by what you're not. You're defining yourself as in the messy middle. Well, the messy middle eventually has to be sorted out to end the mess. And this happens in the 1950s and 60s, and conservatism encounters some challenges there. Then there's the Reconstruction movement, founded in 1922, again, right after World War I, by Mordecai Kaplan, who said that Judaism is not a religion at all. It's a civilization, a culture, if you will, that's progressively evolving. So we're holding on to Judaism, but de-religifying it, okay? And this has real appeal to a fairly small group, very often intellectuals and professionals who don't have much use for the religious rituals anymore, but don't want to forget their Jewish heritage either. Try to make that heritage something positive and progressively evolving. Reconstruction, Mordecai Kaplan. Then this is especially after, well, part of it's after World War II, traditionalism or neo-traditionalism. So on the left-hand side, we have an assembly of rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, who try to reassert Orthodoxy in an American context. Okay, there's a lot of cultural trappings hanging onto us from Eastern Europe. We want to get rid of that, or we can let that go, but all the religious details we want to hold on to. So what's cultural and what's religious? This is a very complex question, but there is some modification going on here while insisting that we are holding on to Orthodoxy, the whole rabbinical tradition. Orthodoxy is to be distinguished from the Hasidim tradition that grew up in the Pale in Eastern Europe in the 18th century. This was, I don't know, how can I describe it? It's kind of a Jewish form of Pentecostalism. You get crazy, you dance a lot, you have, you're really filled with the Spirit. Only it's not the Holy Spirit is understood by Christians. It's the the Spirit of God. It's not a distant thing. It's something that it's not that you possess it, it possesses you. And you can be driven or invited to ecstatic behavior. Very traditionalistic in garb. Again, refer you to the novels of Chaim Potok. Very traditional in all the observances, but not dead orthodoxy, not the dead letter. The living Spirit is key here. You see this in Pentecostalism too. When you get into ecstatic religion, you have to reassert controls because ecstasy can lead to anarchy. And so you'll see in these Hasidic communities very strong controls centralized in the charismatic leader, the Rebbe. And this office of rabbi or rebbe descends by bloodline. And so the rebbe pictured here is the Lubavitcher rebbe, came from that town or that district in Poland, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, whom some of his followers regarded, if not as Messiah, a pretty good facsimile. And what the Rebbe says goes. And these communities are again strong in New York, also in some districts going up the Hudson, and you know, again, prone to scandal when you put that much power in the hands of one man. Guys being guys. I'm not saying this about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but I'm trying to think now of the Netflix series that followed a young lady who fled this community and tried to find. Remember the title of it? Okay, we'll bring the title. Somebody's going to supply the title next week. But yeah, that's there's a great Netflix series talking, describing the tensions involved in this community, where the young lady has an arranged marriage, doesn't like the guy, tries to venture out, wants a broader, more engaged life engaged with modern culture, but that comes with a price as well. So this is not a huge movement in terms of population, but it is very intense. It draws people, survivors of the Holocaust especially, who flee to America. 40% of the Lubavitchers live in New York City. And some of these groups, I can't sort everything out in Israeli politics today. Some of these people are in the extreme right wing of Israeli politics today, part of the Netanyahu coalition, but refusing to undergo military service. Hugely controversial item in Israeli politics. Unorthodox. Okay, is that Netflix? My Unorthodox Life. Okay. Yeah, that's if you need something to watch evenings because you're sick of reading or doing your errands, very gripping series. Yeah, and if you're in Grand Rapids, you can see these wings on the ground. Temple Emmanuel along Fulton, north on the east side. That's a Reform. The Houseman's original temple. Congregation of Havas Israel on Michigan, that's conservative. And then the Chabad House of West Michigan, Joseph Weingarten, the building depicted in the middle there. Upper left-hand side is a really poignant story out of Grand Rapids history. This is the Nar Tamid, the eternal light that is by the in the front of every synagogue. It must be kept lighted at all times. This particular instrument came from a destroyed synagogue in Bavaria. One of the Houseman's grandsons was on the staff of Henry Stimson, the eminent, I think he was Secretary of War in the Roosevelt cabinet. And he was going around after the war was over. He was in the military. He was going around Bavaria to his great-grandfather's hometown, went to the synagogue and found the eternal light lying in the ruins. He rescued it back to Grand Rapids, and it hangs and shines in Temple Emmanuel still today. It's one of just a classic story out of Jewish history. Okay, a few minutes for questions here.
The Padnos family that came to Holland was originally a peddler / salvage person operating somewhere in the South. And someone told him, you would be welcome in Holland, Michigan. They must have known someone who knew someone.
Uh-huh.
And so he came to Holland, Michigan, because he knew that there was an inlet that
Yeah.
was big enough for barges and he
Yep.
could get his stuff in and out. And the whole Padnos story stems from that became, a major philanthropist in Holland and everything else. So that ties in with your
Perfect
comments about
example, yeah.
peddlers, salvage, and
Yeah.
later on, anything related to salvage and recycling.
Yep.
And now today, Padnos is a leader in studying recycling and preservation of
Yeah.
what's valuable and how
Yeah.
to sell all kinds of things in huge quantities that go through the Great Lakes and out through
Yeah.
Chicago and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great story showing the peddling did not go over into department stores, but it kept the peddling, the gathering tradition together, huh?
I'm not sure exactly when that was, probably after World War II, or would have been earlier, maybe.
It was earlier. Yeah.
And would there have been a more established Jewish community in Grand Rapids than they had here?
Yeah, I'm sure that, well, I
Steve.
talked with Jeff once a year there's a telecast of the Yale Harvard game. He's Harvard, 1970 or whatever. And so but yeah, I told him my dad came from Holland and my uncle taught at Holland Christian and so forth. Oh yeah, I know, my dad and hero, yeah, blah, blah, blah. So you get a lot of stories of this family. The roots are not very wealthy, but very entrepreneurial and very smart, looking for what should be done that isn't being done and moving into that niche and then just expanding it, rolling with the flow. And when recycling becomes a thing, they're right there prepared. They see the chance and seize the opportunity. It's a remarkable story, but it's also a classic Jewish American story. Oh, here.
When our ancestors came over in the 1880s and so forth, did they just board a ship and come to New York? They didn't write to the United States and said, we'd like to come, did they? I mean, they didn't have any prior approval to come to
No.
America. They showed up, and if
Yeah.
you were healthy, you were allowed in. Isn't that how it went?
You didn't even have to be healthy until the 1890s. You just come here and take your chances. There were no border controls. The first move to restrict immigration, as I said, is in the 1880s on the West Coast against Chinese and Japanese. And then after 1885, when these new unwashed people are starting to come from Southern and Eastern Europe, there are discussions about in policy circles, we just can't let this go. What should we do? And under the pressures of World War I, when all the alien Americans or aliens living in Americans, the hyphenated Americans, seemed to be a problem on the home front, then you had momentum to pass this radical immigration restriction. But no, among the young men that flowed out of Holland to come to Holland and other places, there were a lot of draft dodgers. There were a lot of people who had no economic future. There were people fleeing, young men fleeing, let's say, marital circumstances that they had thought they had been trapped into by their own doing, and they were deserting. There were people of good character and no resources who came over. But yeah, this is part of so much attention in Dutch immigration to America goes the colonial era, and especially the Midwestern immigration to the 1840s and 50s. But the bulk of Dutch immigration here was from 1879 to 1893, between two Great Depressions, right? You don't want to go to a country that's involved in war, and you don't want to go to a country that's on the economic downside. So this great era of prosperity, that was the peak flow, but no permission. A lot of times some family or neighborhood connections. So, I mean, Bob Swearing has depicted this to the T. what is the figure? 75% of Dutch immigrants to the United States in the 1800s came from like 15% of Dutch municipalities. So it's chain migration, the very same thing that's happening and is denounced now from Guatemala and Mexico and Venezuela. It's a high-risk business, high-risk venture. And so you want to reduce risk. And if you know somebody, that's the link. My wife's family could come to Holland, Michigan. This is after World War II, because my late mother-in-law had an uncle who lived here and would stand sponsor. So yeah, it was wide open. Yeah.
Back to the Padnos family as a young boy, taking a wagon from 14th Street to 8th Street because the Padnoses lived right around the corner from Columbia.
Huh.
And we would bring newspapers during the war, and Mrs. Padnos would handle the scales and give us a few pennies. Yep.
Recycling, good for you.
I think we're out of time, but this is wonderful. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Oh, always a pleasure.